The wind swept low across the valley of Intombe, moving through the grass with a sound that felt alive, like whispers from the ancestors. Night had fallen, deep and heavy, wrapping the land in quiet expectation. Along the riverbank, Zulu warriors waited, silent as the earth itself. They had been there for hours, breathing with the rhythm of the land, eyes fixed on the British convoy that slept across the water. Every man among them knew the weight of what was about to happen. It wasn't just a battle. It was remembrance, for the land that had been taken, for the ancestors who had been silenced, and for the pride that could not be stolen. The valley seemed to breathe with them, as if the spirits had returned to watch what would unfold. Across the river, the British soldiers rested around dim fires, their wagons lined in a long, uneven row. Horses shifted restlessly, sensing what their riders could not. The men spoke in low tones, unaware of the eyes that watched them from the dark hills. They believed the land belonged to them, that their weapons and flags gave them power. But the Zulu warriors knew every hill, every turn of the river, every path hidden beneath the mist. Theirs was not a knowledge written in books. It was the living memory of the land itself. Among the waiting warriors stood their leader, a man whose name carried the strength of many victories. He raised his hand slowly, and silence deepened. His voice, when it came, was low but firm, the kind of tone that moved through hearts rather than ears. "Tonight," he said, "the land remembers who it belongs to." His words rippled through the men like wind over fire. Every warrior bowed his head in silent vow. They were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for truth. Far from them, in the British camp, a lone African scout walked the edge of the river. He had grown up in these valleys, once a child who danced to the drums, now echoing faintly from the distance. He wore the uniform of the foreigners, but his heart belonged to the soil beneath his feet. That evening he felt a restlessness that no reason could quiet. The air was too still, the river too quiet, the stars too dim. He could feel the ancestors stirring, warning him that something was about to break. He went to the captain and whispered that the hills had eyes that night. The captain laughed, brushing him off, saying the Zulu were miles away and the soldiers needed rest. But the scout's instincts burned. He knew that silence before the storm, it was never peace, it was the land holding its breath. And somewhere in the distance he began to hear it, soft, faint, and deep, the rhythm of drums carried by the wind. When he told the captain again, the man waved him off with a weary smile. "You worry too much," he said. The scout turned away, looking toward the hills, and whispered to himself, "And you listen too little." High above the valley, the Zulu warriors tightened their ranks. Clouds rolled over the moon, dimming the night into perfect darkness. The leader raised his spear to the sky, not as a threat, but as a prayer. "When the moon hides, the ancestors rise," he murmured. A signal bird cried out once, clear and sharp, echoing across the valley. Then silence fell again. Moments later, the earth itself seemed to move. Silent feet glided through grass, carrying the will of a nation. The warriors spread wide, circling the river's bend, their formation tight and precise. No torches, no shouting, only breath, heartbeats, and purpose. They moved like water flowing downhill, unstoppable, unseen. And then, from the darkness, the first shout erupted. The British soldiers awoke to chaos. Horses kicked, fire scattered, and confusion roared through the camp. The scout shouted, "They are here!" But his voice was drowned by the sound of drums. No longer distant, now thunder in the night. The rhythm rolled through the valley, a heartbeat too ancient to be silenced. From every side, movement came, fast, fluid, deliberate. The captain tried to form his men into lines, shouting orders that vanished into the wind. Rifles were raised, but shadows moved faster than bullets. The Zulu warriors surged like a living storm, not reckless but united. To them, this was not an act of hatred. It was justice, a reckoning written in the blood of history. Every movement carried purpose, every cry carried memory. They fought not as individuals, but as one spirit reborn through courage. The scout grabbed a frightened young soldier and tried to pull him toward the river, shouting, "Move to the water!" But the boy froze, staring into the mist where shapes advanced with unstoppable grace. Around them, chaos swelled. The British line broke, wagons overturned, the night blazing with fire and fear. Yet amid the noise, the Zulu warriors moved like shadows of destiny. They struck not for glory, but for the right to exist without chains. The river reflected the flames, red and gold and trembling. The air filled with cries, some of fear, some of victory, some of disbelief that such strength could rise from silence. The scout stumbled to the edge of the river, turning back once more. He saw the Zulu leader standing at the rise, calm amid the storm, his hand raised not in triumph but in honor. Even from afar, the scout understood this was not vengeance. It was remembrance. The battle raged until the night itself seemed to burn. Then slowly the drums softened. The noise faded. The air grew heavy again, filled with smoke and memory. The Zulu leader stood by the water, staring at what the dawn would soon reveal. Around him, warriors breathed heavily, some wounded, all changed. The scout hid among the reeds, watching, heart torn between two worlds, the loyalty he had sworn, and the truth that lived in his blood. He whispered into the cold air, "This night will not be forgotten." And indeed, it would not. The valley of Intombe would forever remember that night when the river ran heavy with consequence. When courage rose from silence and reminded the world that pride once awakened cannot be conquered. As the stars faded and dawn brushed the horizon, the valley stood still. The fires died one by one, leaving smoke to curl into the pale sky. The scout closed his eyes, hearing the last echo of drums fade into distance. The land, once again, was quiet. But beneath that silence lay a truth that no empire could erase, that the spirit of the Zulu would endure, carried in every breath of wind, every whisper of water, every beating heart that refused to bow. When dawn broke over the valley of Intombe, the air was still heavy with smoke and silence. The river, which had roared with fire and fury through the night, now flowed quietly again, carrying away the last traces of battle. Mist clung to the hills as if the earth itself wanted to hide what it had witnessed. The Zulu warriors stood upon the banks, their breath slow and deep, their hearts pounding not with triumph, but with the weight of what had been done. Victory had come, but it did not feel like glory. It felt like remembrance, deep, sacred, and heavy with consequence. The leader of the warriors stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The morning sun rose behind him, golden and soft, touching the land with warmth that felt almost forgiving. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the river's murmur, hearing it speak the names of those who had fallen. Around him, the younger warriors waited, silent and uncertain. For many, it was their first battle. They had fought bravely, but their spirits trembled at the sight of what victory looked like. The leader finally spoke, his voice calm, his words slow. "Do not celebrate," he said. "The land has remembered us, but memory comes with pain." Among the scattered survivors of the convoy was the African scout, hidden among the reeds. His heart was torn apart by what he had seen, men he had guided now gone, and the warriors of his people standing as victors in the place where his two worlds had collided. He rose quietly, his mind echoing with the leader's words. He knew the world would soon tell this story in different tongues, one of defeat, another of rebellion, but neither would tell of the truth he had seen with his own eyes. The truth that this was not a night of hatred, but of reclamation. By midday, the Zulu warriors began to move. Their task was done, but their leader knew the price of victory. The British Empire would not forget this day. The rivers of KwaZulu would carry not just stories but warnings, and the drums of the next conflict had already begun to beat faintly in the future. Yet as the warriors walked away from the valley, there was no fear among them, only resolve. They knew they had spoken to the world in the only language it seemed to understand: courage. That evening, they gathered in their homeland, around the great circle of stones where the elders waited. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in fire and gold. The leader stood before the council, his expression steady. An elder spoke first, his voice rough with years. "You have done what many could not," he said. "The land will remember you." The leader bowed his head, replying, "Let it remember all of us, not as conquerors, but as keepers." The youngest among the warriors looked on, trying to understand the weight of what they had become part of. One asked, was this victory enough to keep the empire away? The leader looked toward the horizon, where smoke still lingered faintly from the burned convoy. "No victory keeps an empire away," he said softly. "But every act of courage plants a seed that no empire can uproot." His words settled over them like prayer. In the days that followed, the British army began to move again, their messengers carrying tales of the massacre at Intombe. But in every retelling, truth faded and pride twisted the story. To the empire, it became a tale of betrayal, savagery, and vengeance. Yet among the Zulu, it became something else, a memory carved into the soul of a people. Songs were born from it, drums carried it. Mothers whispered it to their children as a lesson, that the land remembers, and those who defend it never die forgotten. The African scout eventually returned to his village, silent and haunted. He did not speak of what he had seen for many moons. But sometimes at night, he would walk to the river and sit there for hours, watching the water move as if carrying unseen voices. He could hear both sides of the story echoing in his heart, one told in reports, the other sung by his people. He realized then that history was never written with ink. It was written with memory, and memory belonged to those who refused to forget. One night, as the moon rose full again, the scout returned to the valley of Intombe. The fires were long gone, the ground had healed, and grass had grown over what was once soaked in blood. Yet the land still breathed, quietly, eternally aware. He knelt by the water and spoke to the air. "I was a messenger for them," he said softly, "but tonight I speak for you." The wind stirred gently, carrying his words away, and for a brief moment, he felt peace. In the villages beyond, life began to move again. The drums of harvest replaced the drums of war. Children laughed, women sang, and elders spoke of courage that would one day inspire generations to come. But beneath it all, in the rhythm of daily life, the memory of that night lived on. It was not spoken of every day. It didn't need to be. It was carried in the way people tilled the soil, in the way they stood proud, in the way they prayed when thunder rolled across the sky. Years later, when travelers would pass through the valley, they would feel a strange stillness, a whisper carried in the wind. They would not know why the air felt heavier there, or why the river seemed to sing differently. But those who knew, the descendants of those warriors, would smile quietly and say, "You are standing where courage was born." The leader of the warriors, now an old man, often returned to that place. He never built a monument or carved his name upon stone. He believed the land itself was the only memorial worthy of such a night. One evening, as he stood watching the setting sun, his grandson asked, "Why do you come here still?" The old man smiled gently. "Because every time I stand here," he said, "I hear the heartbeat of our people. It reminds me that freedom is not something you are given. It is something you protect." The child nodded, looking out across the shimmering river. "Will they ever forget us?" he asked. The elder placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not as long as the river flows," he answered Dot, and as the last rays of sunlight kissed the valley, the story of Intombe became more than history. It became heritage, a living song carried from heart to heart, generation to generation. The world might record it as a battle, but the Zulu remembered it as awakening, the night when the land found its voice again, and the children of the soil reminded the world that courage does not die with time.